people are freaking out in Lexington over Mark Pope right now. And it is somewhat predictable this was going to happen at some point this season, but they go down, they lose to Arkansas, Calipari, big homecoming. We all saw what happened last Saturday. And then Tuesday, they come out and was a pathetic showing by Kentucky, for being honest, against a pretty solid and a very well-coached Ole Miss team. Kentucky loses 2 in a row. I think they're 10th right now in the SEC standings. I'll start here, Ben. Kentucky fans that are freaking out about Mark Pope right now are just flat out dumb. They're flat out dumb. I understand you're at a blue blood. I understand there's a certain expectation to be a national title contender every single year, Ben. I understand. I'm a Duke fan. Like, every Carolina fan knows this. Every Kansas fan knows this. But the issue is you just had a complete overhaul, 100% overhaul from coaching staff and players into this new regime. And that Kentucky, they were a top 5 team at one point this season. They were rolling off. They beat arguably the best team in the country in Duke this year. They've won some big-time games. Meanwhile, they lose to a crappy Arkansas team in a game that Kentucky fans built up more in their head than they probably should have. And then they lose to a pretty well-coached Ole Miss team in the SEC. The sky's not falling in Lexington. Mark Pope is fine. Mark Pope is still the guy for the job. And there's 2 things to go about this. One, the way Mark Pope's style is, look, a lot of the times if you don't have NBA talent, you're gonna win one and lose one in a very competitive SEC conference. That's just how it goes when you shoot that many 3-pointers, when you don't have that much talent. And that leads into my next point is this Kentucky team, they're just flat out not that talented. They overachieved already to this point in the season, and so everybody built it up in their heads that Kentucky is this good of a team. This is who they are. No matter what, they're going to play this way for the rest of the season, even with all the injuries they're dealing with. But this Kentucky team, they're not a top 5 talented, top 10 talented team in the country. They are just flat out playing a really good system, and Mark Pope has squeezed every ounce of potential out of this unit. This is not a Mark Pope problem in Kentucky. It's flat out, this team's just not that talented.
Yeah, and I mean, the resume is still pretty good. And I mean, we have to consider Lamont Butler's been hurt for a bit too. Like, that definitely factors into things because he's an important player for them. They're having to go a little deeper on their bench than I think they'd like to normally. I do think this is just a bad stretch. I do think they're going to rebound, but right there, we've talked about this. There is kind of a ceiling on this team. I think maybe like in early January, I'd kind of bought into maybe there's something more here. There's not. You know, they've got a bunch of decent pieces, and I think the pieces fit well together, but you don't have those 1 or 2 guys who can just take over and be stars in moments that you need them to be stars to beat the Dukes and Auburns. Obviously, Kentucky beat Duke, but my point stands. Duke would beat Kentucky by a substantial amount if they were to play today. So I do think that obviously, like, Mark Pope coming in, like, I think you'd be silly to expect him to be competing for a national championship year one. It's a complete overhaul. As far as I know, there's no guys, at least of significance, that returned from last year's Kentucky team on this Pope team. Like, they started from scratch. All these guys are from the portal or from high school. They're going to be okay. As long as they just recruit better talent going forward, which I think they will. They'll be fine.
That's the thing. They don't have an NBA guy on this roster. You look at all these national title teams. Look at all these great teams in college basketball. At least you have 1 or 2 real NBA dudes on your roster, and Kentucky doesn't. Like, I think Jackson Robinson is a really good player, but I don't see him as a potential NBA guy. He can't really handle the ball that well. He's a great shooter and can knock down any shot on the court, but him creating his own shot is difficult. He thrives in Mark Pope's system where, look, you're not asked to sit there and go iso ball and create your own shot. Every shot is created for you, and that's the beauty of his system. But on the flip side of that system was designed at BYU for a team that couldn't create their own shot. Nobody on that BYU team could go ISO. And that's why it worked at BYU, and that's why guys looked so good in that system, is because they weren't forced to, hey, it's 10 seconds left, go one-on-one on this defender that's a little bit bigger and more athletic than you and try and get by them. And because typically that offense wasn't going to work at BYU, and it's not going to work at Kentucky this year.
Yeah, and that system also provides a lot of those generated looks from three.
Mm-hmm.
And 3-point shooting, especially teams that want to put up like 30 plus 3-pointers a game, 25, 30, like there's going to be some variance. I think this was extra true with BYU when they had to really be reliant on that rather than generating looks inside just because the roster wasn't really going to provide that. They do have a little more of the personnel at Kentucky to be able to get to the rim. So they're going to be doing that a little bit more, but it's still, they're still wanting to be a heavily like 3-point shooting team. That's kind of what the system that Pope runs is generating, is those open 3-point looks. So, some days you're going to miss like all of them and you're going to lose to a team you probably shouldn't by like 10. That's just sort of what you're going to have to live with. But I do think, right, like, as we've talked about ad nauseum, like Pope just needs like a little bit of time to bring in like the top tier blue blood talent.
Yep.
And I think once he does that, I think they're in good shape.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too, I will give Kentucky fans, the one thing you should be worried about with this team, where you go, okay, that's really concerning, is the defense, because it feels like any team can just have their way on offense and pick their spots and play the way they want to play, get their best player involved on offense. And like the Arkansas game was a little different because I felt like just that was the all-time FU Calipari game, and those Arkansas dudes just played out of their minds, and that was their Super Bowl this year. But then you look at Ole Miss, like Ole Miss was just able to get whatever shot they wanted in that game. And that's been kind of the theme with a lot of Kentucky games. But Kentucky's like, yeah, you can get whatever twos you want. We'll just hit 15, 20 threes in this game, and we're going to shoot 35, 40 of them because that's our goal. Mark Pope at BYU was classic. Hey, race to 25. Race to 35. We want to shoot 35 threes a game. And we've seen that at Kentucky, and the defense is a problem. And that's what scares me the most in March Madness is, look, if they're not shooting 35% in a game, let's say they come out and shoot 30% in a game, and they're a 4 seed, and they're going up against a team like, I don't know, like a Utah Valley type team or one of these 13, 14 teams that can really give a team a run for their money and play well defensively in their experience. Look, man, you're shooting less than 35% with that defense, you can lose to anybody, but with the way they shoot threes, obviously we've seen this season, they can beat anybody like Duke.
No, I totally agree. I was going to kind of echo the same sentiment a little bit, that this is a team where I think they get things together. I mean, if they keep playing the way they are, like the seeding's going to keep going down, down, down. I don't think that happens. I think they rebound a little bit, maintain a 3 to 5-ish seed. Maybe not 3, but 4 or 5. I remember seeing in bracketology, I started dabbling in bracketology the last week or two. I saw a 3 seed Kentucky versus 14 seed Utah Valley, and I said, ooh.
Yeah, the committee's
don't like that.
The committee's gonna want that game too.
No, they are for the storylines. But this is a team that is very susceptible to being upset. That's the one thing I'll throw in. And I do understand if Kentucky fans are very worried about that, because I don't blame them.
Because this is a classic team in the NCAA tournament when you're filling out your bracket and you go, I don't want to pick Kentucky as a 2 or 3 seed to go far, but if this team was a 6 seed, you go, I like them in my Elite 8.
No, for sure. Seedings and matchups are going to dictate a lot of that, but I do agree that they're kind of... Yeah, no, you don't know what you're getting from them. Makes them dangerous a little bit, one way or another.